Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, March 25th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. I'm coming to you all from our continually upgraded studio here at Industrious in Midtown Manhattan, the Mo News Podcast studio coming together, Jill.
I see a cool pair of Mo News sneakers. I see some books, The Big Fail, and I cannot quite make out the second book, but I'm liking the look there, Moshe.
Jill, as I turn the camera here, there's an empty seat that's waiting there for you.
But no pressure.
Whoever wants to fill that cool seat next to me here on the podcast. No pressure at all, Jill. We're just a train away here in New York City. As we've told you, our new headquarters here for Mo News is an Industrious. It's a shared work office space. You might have heard the ads that we've done for them. We have a special discount going. So check out an Industrious near you if you're looking for a workspace for yourself, your growing business, your large business, over at mo.news/industrious. Jill, with that, before we get to headlines, I want to wish everyone a happy International Waffle Day.
Yes, and waffles apparently date back to the ancient Greeks, brought over to the United States by Thomas Jefferson himself.
Yes. There were certainly Dutch immigrants and others who brought waffles over. Jefferson reportedly brought a waffle iron home from France. Remember, he was ambassador to France and helped spark a fad of waffle parties in the U.S. So we can thank Thomas Jefferson partially, and we can thank the ancient Greeks for giving us democracy, Socrates, and waffles. Happy International Waffle Day. Not to be confused, Jill, with National Waffle Day, which falls in August. So 2 dates to celebrate.
I love when the national and the international people can't get it together. So we've got to celebrate it twice.
The international, the waffle people, the key waffle stakeholders, they've gone with 2 different dates here, but 2 dates to celebrate. I love a waffle, and I love an excuse to eat a waffle twice a year or more.
All right, let's get to some headlines. The big story of the day: Trump officials accidentally include a journalist in a group chat about United States war plans.
Yeah, some of us use group chats to plan a dinner outing. Some of us use it to plan military campaigns. We'll tell you about it and how people are reacting.
Also in Washington, the continued debate over deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members. The comparison a judge made in court yesterday. Overseas, the U.S. and Russia wrapped up ceasefire talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at ending fighting in the Black Sea, for starters.
They're trying baby steps here in ending that war.
And in Turkey, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets after the president arrested a top political rival. In some business news, the DNA testing company 23andMe has filed for bankruptcy. Now some users are worried about the fate of their sensitive information.
Yeah, what's going to happen to our data?
Competition is fierce at U.S. law schools this year as applications surge. Spoiler alert, this often happens during an election year, but apparently there are some other factors in play right now. Finally, it's cherry blossom season, and Moshe and I might get a sneak peek at the Japanese trees during a visit to Washington, D.C. later this week.
Yes, we're headed back to Washington, Jill. Well, for big political reporting, but also we'll check out the cherry blossoms.
And Moshe is on this day in history.
It's a big anniversary for The Bachelor, Jill. You still watching The Bachelor or The Bachelorette?
I am not, but I was a huge fan back in the day.
Well, we will take you back there.
Let's start with this huge political story. A group chat gone very wrong. Top U.S. national security officials accidentally included a journalist in a chat group using the messaging app Signal, where they were talking about highly sensitive military strikes in Yemen that happened on March 15th. We reported about those military strikes here on the podcast. Well, the chat appeared to include 18 top Trump officials, like Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller. Though some of the names were just displayed in the chat with their initials, the group was created by National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. The group chat was called Houthi PC Small Group, and included in the chat was the Atlantic's editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg, who revealed it in an article that he posted Monday on the Atlantic's website. Goldberg revealed in this tell-all piece in the Atlantic called "The Trump Administration Accidentally Texted Me Its War Plans," He said he initially had doubts that the text group was real because he couldn't believe that all of these officials would talk about imminent war plans on Signal, which is a messaging app that encrypts conversations. So he thought this was AI or some attempt by a US adversary to get him to print misinformation.
The National Security Council, I asked various officials, including Pete Hegseth this morning, for comment. And the first question I had for everyone is this real? I wanted to make sure, obviously, before we go public, and say, are you sure that this is not a disinformation campaign run by a foreign state, a non-state actor of some sort, trying to target a journalist for reasons I couldn't explain? And they're like, no, this is apparently a real channel, and I appreciate them telling the truth about that, and we published.
Did they seem alarmed when you reached out for comment?
Probably is not the happiest day that they experienced in the White House so far, but they were professional about it.
Goldberg says he also couldn't believe that they would be so, quote, reckless as to include him in the discussion. In the chat, the officials debated whether to delay a potential strike on the Houthis, with Vice President Vance raising concerns about oil prices and conflicting signals to European allies. Hegseth and Miller supported moving ahead. The next day, Hegseth sent a message with operational details of the planned strikes, including targets, weapons, and attack sequencing. Goldberg ultimately realized that the chat was legit after the U.S. carried out the strikes as described on March 15th. He said he had a 2-hour heads up about the attack with very detailed instructions, including weapons and targets. Hours later, Goldberg removed himself from the Signal group and reached out to the involved parties for a statement. The spokesperson for the National Security Council, Brian Hughes, confirmed the Signal group to Goldberg. From Hughes's statement, he says, quote, "This appears to be an authentic message chain, and we are reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain. The thread is a demonstration of the deep and thoughtful policy coordination between senior officials." He added, "The ongoing success of the Houthi operation demonstrates that there were no threats to troops or national security." But Moshe, I mean, my God, could you imagine being Jeffrey Goldberg?
Right. Like, wait, there's no way. Wait, there's
This
no way
can't
this is
be
the actual
real.
JD Vance. Wait, that sounds like JD Vance. There's no way that's Pete Hegseth. No, someone's trying to play a joke on me. Wait a second. They're saying they're going to bomb Yemen today? Oh my God, they bombed Yemen. This is real. And so that's essentially what he takes you through in the piece. We did a number of posts yesterday on Instagram about it, notably that statement that you just read from the National Security Council. There's no acknowledgement that there's anything wrong with the use of Signal, even though, you know, there's a number of people on the Republican side and Democratic side on Capitol Hill who are very concerned about what took place here, both the use of Signal, whether that was appropriate or even legal here, and you know, the lack of use of secure communications for war planning, for military planning. You know, this is typically done in rooms called SCIFs, SCIF, SCIFs, which is an acronym for a longer compartmentalized intelligence area. You're not allowed to bring devices in there. You're not allowed to bring Apple Watches in there. Sometimes you can't even take notes in there, or you have to destroy documents that you receive in there. That's typically how that works in a number of government buildings. You're not typically doing it on a consumer app like Signal, you know, which is again where people use Signal for slightly more secure communications, but it's available to all of us to download in the App Store, sort of like WhatsApp or Telegram, slightly more secure, but by no means secure enough to be doing government communications, national security issues, easily hackable, trackable, and in this case, easy to add the wrong cell phone number. In the case of Jeffrey Goldberg, we haven't found out yet, as of this recording, who they intended or who they thought JG was going to be in the chain. Apparently, he describes how they would all, like, you know, basically acknowledge who they are in the chain. He stayed silent the entire time. It's, again, highly unusual here, at least from the perspective of this reporter, to do sensitive military action using Signal. And again, you know, I think for a variety of legal reasons, you don't have from the National Security Council an acknowledgement beyond this is an authentic message chain, inadvertent, and my favorite line, demonstration of the deep and thoughtful policy coordination. So they're focusing on the positive side of the fact that this chain was effectively live and available to a journalist in the preceding days into the attack and then afterwards.
And looking at the bigger picture here, Goldberg suggests that Mike Waltz may have actually violated the Espionage Act by improperly handling sensitive information and discussing pending military action on Signal, especially with a journalist mistakenly included. Reporters asked President Trump about the messages on Monday. He claimed that he hadn't heard about it. Here is a bit of President Trump's answer.
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
Having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
with the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis?
Correct.
Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time.
Members of Congress on both sides of the aisle are expressing concerns. Democratic lawmakers are calling for an investigation into the reports. Delaware Senator Chris Coons, the top Democrat on the panel that controls the Pentagon budget, said, quote, every single one of the government officials on this text chain have now committed a crime, even if accidentally, that would normally involve a jail sentence. Others have called for a hearing. They say this breach could make Americans less safe. Meanwhile, Republican Representative Derek Van Orden, who is from Wisconsin, he told Axios that there should be some form of administrative accountability, like retraining, if it is discovered that this was a mistake.
Which it's clear it's inadvertent, but Jill, inadvertent or not, typically there are major fines, well, prison sentences for revealing classified information at this level. We have reported on that before. We've heard from officials inside the government who are like, oh my God, if I did this, I would lose my job and potentially go to prison here. But in this case, it doesn't appear like any heads are going to roll, at least not yet. But I imagine there's a lot of embarrassment and concern within the White House and the national security establishment as to how this could have happened. And I guess the luck of sorts that this was a responsible journalist who decided not to reveal this in advance, even afterwards in the article, makes a point in the story of not revealing details about the weaponry, targeting a variety of things, but speaks, takes screenshots of various messages where they are critical of European allies and say some other things, but they don't get into details as to, again, strategic targeting and some of the things that are particularly sensitive when it comes to intelligence here. As far as what happens next, likely here, this will be handled internally. I don't see a scenario where Republicans on Capitol Hill will go out here and very openly criticize the administration or call for investigations. They're going to defer to them, as you typically see parties do. Certainly saw it with Democrats and Joe Biden in the aftermath of Afghanistan and some other items. I don't see a scenario here where Republicans, call for major hearings here. Now, one person chiming in on this, Jill, not surprisingly, Hillary Clinton. She tweeted out yesterday with a link to Goldberg's story with the eyes emoji and the quote, "You've got to be kidding me." Hillary Clinton, of course, got a lot of grief for using a private email account, private server, in some cases classified information, but her emails, but her server, a lot of scrutiny. You remember all that in 2014, 2015, 2016?
I do. And but her emails was trending on Twitter or X on Monday afternoon.
Yeah. So Hillary chiming in here, not surprisingly. Jill, one thing we joked about on our internal chat, we do it on Slack here at Mo News, not on Signal, but wondering if one of us was accidentally added to a thread like this, would we have taken ourselves off or just kind of lingered longer? But I imagine, as I think about it longer, I would have loved to be lingering and be like, oh, they've added me to another chat. I have another chat. But I imagine Goldberg probably consulted with attorneys at Atlantic being like, ultimately, do you want to go to prison? Once you realize this was real, you should probably get yourself off of this Signal chain.
You've let this go on too long. You knew this was real a long time ago.
Like you suspected it was real, and then when the actual bombing happened, it was real. It's like, get off now and reveal you were on it. But it was interesting, Jill, to see the reaction from people. I mean, certainly a lot of people, Republicans and Democrats, critical of this, but you certainly heard from some Trump people in Trump world, Trump advocates who are like, I can't believe this reporter, wrote this story. As opposed to being, outraged at the leak itself. So it is always interesting based on people's politics, how they react to this sort of thing.
So it appears Mike Waltz created it. And I think the question is Is there somebody else with like a JG initial that he was trying to add instead? How did Jeffrey Goldberg get on this thing? I'm just thinking that perhaps they meant to add somebody with like a similar type of number or name. And were they just thinking that person was being quiet? No one, I guess, was monitoring who was on it. The whole story is wild.
JG's in the chat, has nothing to say. No, this whole story is wild, and I imagine, we're just 24 hours into it at this point, Jill. I imagine we'll learn more in the coming days and weeks. But I'll end with this. I know we've been sort of lighthearted about the entire thing, but ultimately, this has real-world ramifications. This is a military strike. This could have led to the injury or death of American troops. If somebody who, wished us ill or an adversary was that accidental person. They included very detailed information on when the U.S. would be striking, what weapons they would be using. That is why this is a very serious breach, all jokes aside, in terms of the group chat. And that's why some people are not laughing about this even a bit in Washington and in the national security community. And that's one of the reasons, again, there are procedures for sharing this type of information, for having these conversations, and the fact that they were using a chat group here, and again, a publicly available, downloadable chat app, is very concerning to some folks.
Also in Washington on Monday, the continuing legal back and forth about the recent deportations to El Salvador. A federal appeals court heard arguments on President Trump's appeal of a lower court restraining order that halted the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members under the Alien Enemies Act. The wartime law from 1798 allows the administration to deport individuals without going through the courts. A district court judge, James Boasberg, has tried to block the deportations. He even called for the administration to turn the planes around that were carrying the deportees earlier this month as they were in the air, because he said that each individual should be receiving a hearing from a judge before being sent out of the country for alleged ties to the Tren de Aragua gang. But roughly 200 men were still deported to El Salvador, with the Trump administration arguing that the plane was outside of the judge's jurisdiction when he issued the order. The Department of Justice has argued that Boasberg does not have the power to make that call. Trump has gone after the judge, saying he has a conflict of interest in the case and that he should be impeached. In the past couple of days, he wrote on Truth Social that this case was a constitutional disaster and that the judge should be disbarred. So we are now at the next level of federal courts. The appeals panel for the Monday hearing included judges Karen Henderson, Patricia Millett, and Justin Walker, two of whom were appointed by Republican presidents. Millett was appointed by President Obama. Inside the courtroom Monday, Millett said the treatment of the deportees was worse than how the United States handled accused Nazis during World War II. The last time the 1798 Act was invoked, but an attorney for the Department of Justice pushed back against that comparison.
Yeah, take a listen to a bit of that.
There were plane loads of people. I mean, it's a class action. There were plane loads of people. There were no procedures in place to notify people. Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act.
Well, Your Honor, we certainly dispute the Nazi analogy.
So we should note, back in World War II, the last time this law from 1798 was used, typically only used during wartime in American history, suspected Nazis were granted hearings before action was taken against them. In this case, as we've told you, Venezuelan migrants had no opportunity to challenge their alleged connection to the Tren de Aragua gang. And that's been a lot of the controversy here around its use, which is even if someone is here illegally, even if there are various allegations, that they should have their day in court here. There have been reports that a couple deportees may have had nothing to do with the gang. You may have heard about several barbers from Venezuela, one named Franco Jose Tiapa. He had reportedly requested asylum in the U.S. in 2023 after experiencing persecution at home. He was part of this group. There's another barber / makeup artist named Andres Cedeno Gil, whose family said he was also here on asylum and didn't get his day in court. Now, DHS is pushing back, saying we don't just go off of tattoos. We have evidence that these guys were in gangs. They haven't revealed much beyond that. But the issue here is they're now in a foreign prison. It's not clear what will happen to them next. If they will return to the U.S. for court ever, how long are they in Salvador for? Will they be returned from El Salvador to Venezuela? Just a lot of questions there. Again, concern from some of these judges as they go through this appellate court process. One of the things that concerns them about the Alien Enemies Act is the ability for the administration to just deport people without going through the courts. They want judges to be able to hear these cases, even if, again, there are major allegations against them, the whole due process that we've had here.
So the appeals court will now decide if Trump can keep using this wartime law or if the Venezuelans will get hearings before they're deported. A ruling from the appeals court is expected in the coming days. Meanwhile, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is set to visit the prison in El Salvador where the men were sent tomorrow, something that, of course, we will be following. Time for the speed read. Let's start with some international headlines from Reuters. The United States and Russian officials held talks in Saudi Arabia on Monday, focused on a deal to end combat on the Black Sea before a wider ceasefire deal is reached between Russia and Ukraine. Similar talks were held over the weekend with Ukrainian officials. It isn't clear how the talks went. We should expect some type of joint statement later today. But while those talks were happening, a Russian missile strike reportedly damaged a school and a hospital in Ukraine. At least 74 people were wounded. The White House said it is looking to stop fighting in the Black Sea to allow the free flow of shipping, although there hasn't been much military activity in that area in recent months. Both sides nominally agreed to an energy infrastructure ceasefire last week, although it isn't clear when that is set to begin and if either side has officially signed off on it.
Yeah, the ceasefire agreement is all about smaller ceasefire deals before a larger deal. But the war continues here. Russia launches third consecutive overnight air attack in Ukraine overnight last night. Russia says in turn that they have downed a number of Ukrainian drones at the same time. It comes as the Ukrainians are expressing concern here about the relationship between Putin and Trump, the more sympathetic, friendlier tone that the U.S. has taken when it comes to Vladimir Putin specifically. The U.S. Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, telling Tucker Carlson late last week that he does not view Putin as a, quote, bad guy and actually likes him. He did add that the war over 3 years since Russia first invaded is a, quote, complicated situation. There's never just one person to blame in Witkoff's experience. Now, at the same time, you have seen Trump and others in the administration push back saying, we trust but verify. We don't trust the Russians completely either. But even saying things like Putin is not a bad guy is especially concerning to those in Europe and those in Ukraine who have very much experienced Putin as a bad guy. He has been indicted by the international courts for war crimes here. And so that is a particular concern. But the Trump administration is taking on the tack that words about Putin have not helped bring this war to an end. So they are trying rhetorically to take on a slightly more friendly tone here because criticizing Putin, they don't believe is going to serve any purpose here, even if he's, committed alleged war crimes in Ukraine, a variety of horrific things that have taken place in Ukraine over these last 3 years.
Continuing our international coverage from the AP, protests have erupted across Turkey after the mayor of Istanbul was jailed over the weekend. The mayor happens to be the main political rival to the president of the country. Ekrem İmamoğlu was accused of corruption and supporting terrorism. He denies the charges. He says they're politically motivated. Police arrested him just hours after Turkey's main opposition party chose him as their candidate in the 2028 presidential election. Since he was first detained last week, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the street in the largest protests the country has seen in over a decade. Although they are largely peaceful, more than 1,000 people have been arrested for disturbances, and police have used water cannons, tear gas, pepper spray, and fired plastic pellets at protesters across cities, including Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir. Protesters have also reported hurling stones, fireworks, and other missiles at riot police. Nearly 100 police officers have been reported injured.
So the government here, the tactic by Erdogan, the president, has been to ban protests in a number of major cities. They're also limiting social media access, flooding pro-government media sites with news favorable to their case. Erdogan has been the leader in Turkey, if you've heard his name before, Tayyip Erdogan, since 2003. He served as both prime minister. He served as president for several terms. His second term ends in 2028. He is technically limited constitutionally in Turkey to 2 terms. Unless parliament calls for early elections, cuts his second term short, there's a loophole there for him as he looks to continue his leadership of Turkey for more than 2 decades here. He did face an attempted coup back in 2016, and he has taken what was effectively a democracy and turned it increasingly into an authoritarian government there, taking control of the media, banning protests, a variety of things. And now, in this case, it appears arresting a very popular and likely political opponent here. Imamoglu has been the mayor of Istanbul, but since back in 2019, he's been reelected twice. He is seen as a very probable candidate who can beat Erdogan if somehow he's able to run for reelection again in 2028, or Erdogan's party. Turkey has an interesting divide, Jill, not unlike here in the U.S., where you have much more liberal cities and much more conservative rural areas, much of the country. And so that's been the divide here. This guy, very popular in the city of Istanbul, extremely populous. Erdogan, very popular in other areas of Turkey. And so we'll watch what unfolds here. But the protests have been significant. We've been hearing from folks, including in the Mo News team, who've been watching what's taking place there, that things are very precarious right now in Turkey. So we'll keep monitoring them.
Some business news from CNBC. 23andMe, the DNA testing company, filed for bankruptcy on Sunday night. The company was once valued at $6 billion. Its CEO, Anna Wojcicki, also resigned, although she'll still be a member of the board. She wrote on Monday, there is no doubt that the challenges faced by 23andMe through an evolving business model have been real, but my belief in the company and its future is unwavering. She founded the company back in 2006. It went public in 2021, but its stock has been in free fall in recent years as the company struggled to get recurring revenue and compete in the research and therapeutics industry. As of Monday morning, it reported a market cap of $25 million. So again, quite the free fall from a company that was once valued at $6 billion.
Yeah, like more than 95% of its value done. Demand is drying up for these types of services because it turns out when you have something like 23andMe and you do your DNA testing, you don't really need to do it again. One of the issues with any business where you sell one product to people and you're like, you know what, I don't need another one. Like I've done that before. And so they haven't quite figured out sort of the next thing. 23andMe, the company is hoping it'll get bought. One reason it's hoping to get bought here is all the data that it has. Now, the company's privacy policies say that the data can be sold to other firms if you use 23andMe. You agreed to that. 23andMe says there will be no changes in how it protects consumer data while it's in bankruptcy court. Now, at the same time, fair warning to all of you, if you've done 23andMe, think you've done 23andMe, go log in, because thanks to the state of California and some of their data laws, you have the ability to delete your data. So if you're a 23andMe customer and you're concerned about your data getting out there or being sold, you can go to the 23andMe website and you can delete your data. In fact, it was so busy in terms of people trying to do that in the past 24 hours, Jill, that people are having trouble logging into 23andMe. But sometime in the coming days here, head over there. You can actually download your data if you're interested in it and then delete it from 23andMe. And so there you have it, a little consumer alert for all of you.
I've never done any of those. Have you?
Yeah, I think I actually did it. And that's why I just read that. And I'm like, I need to go head over there and delete my data. I was curious, it's like I found out I was like 4% Italian. I didn't know that. And then you can go back in it and like you can see that like something happened 8 generations ago where like suddenly an Italian got in the mix. And you're like, well, who? I wonder who that person was in the early 1800s. But, I haven't figured it out yet.
From the Wall Street Journal, applications to law school are surging this year amid a weakening job market and a contentious political climate. The competition is fierce. Applications to the nation's nearly 200 law schools is up 21% compared to last year. Georgetown Law School alone received 14,000 applications. Mosh, they only have 650 spots. The University of Michigan Law School received more applications than at any point in its 166-year history. Its admissions dean said faculty members gasped when they heard the numbers. Election years tend to cause more interest in law school. Some are saying a second Trump term is exacerbating that. They view the legal profession as a way to make a difference among a divided country. Schools are also reporting that a lot of applicants are citing making a difference as a reason for applying.
The job market certainly has something to do with this as well. There have been layoffs in tech and other sectors, some people struggling to find work. So why not go back to school here? The legal world often gives you a stable salary. It's more immune to AI advancements if you're actually a lawyer. That said, total numbers still fall beyond historic peaks in the early 90s and mid-2000s when there were 100,000 people who would apply to law schools. This year, there have only been 63,000 applicants, though you still have until May to apply. So record by recent numbers, but overall, you go back to the early 90s, and we had a a lot of lawyers or a lot of people attempting to be lawyers back then. Some are worried about over-enrollment, as in these law schools letting in more people because they have so many applicants and people willing to pay, which then could lead to all these would-be lawyers in 3 years having trouble finding jobs down the road. So a heads up, if you're applying to law school or thinking about it, you got a lot of competition this year.
You make a great point. Good luck getting hired in 3 years. That's how long law school is, right?
Yeah, though, you always hear from your lawyer friends. I mean, there's I definitely have some lawyer friends who enjoy their jobs, but the vast majority of lawyers, maybe it's like a shtick among lawyers. They're like, oh, never become a lawyer. It sucks.
That's what I tell people about journalism, though. Anytime anyone asks me for advice about becoming a reporter, I'm like, have you considered anything else? And if you have, what are you doing?
I think given the state of the media these days and legacy media and cuts, I certainly understand that. I think it's a super exciting time to go into journalism, Jill, with all opportunities to start your own. I've heard of people who started their own news channel on Instagram. Have you heard of those people?
There is someone that I follow. I forget his name though.
I think it's a super exciting time, and we have a shortage of journalists. A whole bunch of people have to leave the profession. I think we are in dire need, this democracy of good information out there and people who want to tell good stories. So honestly, this is your call in this story. For those of you applying to law school, if you don't get in, have you considered journalism? We need you.
It sounds like, though, that the people who are applying for law school are doing it because they are politically motivated to do it. And we would argue that we need more journalists who want to play it straight.
We do. But, maybe even more partisan media. Sure, we need some more liberals and conservatives in the media, too. The more, the merrier.
Jump right in. The water is warm.
Jump right in. The water is warm. Just be transparent. Don't pretend to be something you're not.
Okay, from Newsweek, it is time for cherry blossom season. And Moshe, you and I are headed to Washington, D.C. on Thursday, so perfect timing. Peak bloom is expected this weekend in the U.S. Capitol. The trees, by the way, were first gifted to the United States from the people of Japan in 1912. It was a sign of friendship. Since then, the Japanese trees have made their way to other cities across the country, including New York, Philadelphia, Dallas, and St. Louis, among others.
Jill, we'll get to see it this week, though typically this time of year is also where allergy season is out of control. So definitely, in addition to being ready to see cherry blossoms, bring your Zysol or whatever you take for allergies, because even people who aren't affected by allergies, you come to Washington, D.C., and it's going to hit you. I promise.
Good to know. Because the whole time as you were saying that, I was like, whatever.
Yeah, no. I'm just saying, even if you're not affected by most places, DC is it's a literal swamp. It was built on a swamp. So there's a lot happening there. If you're not allergic to our nation's politics, you might be allergic to whatever's in the air there. But Jill, I will have a chance. Alex and I later this year are traveling to Japan as a couple for the first time, so I'm excited to see them there. Though I think that we're going to be out of season there. We'll miss peak season, but nonetheless, cherry blossoms in their home country. All right, now time for On This Day in History on this March 25th. Sarah Jessica Parker turned 60 today. Elton John turned 78 today. Aretha Franklin also happened to be born on this day. So if your March 25th birthday, I'm waiting for your Oscar or your Emmy or your Grammy.
No pressure, but apparently people born on this day do pretty well.
Yeah, Gloria Steinem, too. Anyway, let's begin with a couple events that took place on this day. We go back to the year 451, nearly 1,600 years ago. Venezia, Italy, was founded on this day. Fast forward to the 20th century, on this day in 1967, Martin Luther King led a major march of anti-war demonstrators in Chicago, demonstrating against the Vietnam War. He had moral objections to the war, but also argued, and this is part of the growing anti-war movement at the time, that it was diverting money and attention from domestic programs that would aid the poor, all poor, white and black. It's interesting, Jill, some of the documents that have already leaked have been declassified by the FBI at the time. They were very concerned about this, that MLK was basically taking a civil rights movement and going national and across all sectors with his poverty marches, with anti-war marches. And you could see these memos from J. Edgar Hoover and others very concerned about it, reinforcing the idea, and we'll hear about this later this year, as Donald Trump has promised to declassify all government documents. The theory goes that the government knew about the assassination attempt or the assassination of MLK in advance. All right, we end here with a bit of music and TV history. On this day in 1960, Ray Charles recorded Georgia on My Mind as part of his Genius Hits the Road album in New York. On this day in 2002, turning 23 years old today, Soak Up the Sun by Sheryl Crow was released. And a TV moment on this day, we mentioned it at the top, The Bachelor, originally premiered on ABC on this day in 2002. The show is now 23 years old. There have been 29 seasons of it. The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, that original Bachelor, Alex, Michelle, I don't know. It didn't work out for him there, but eventually I'm told he got married and had some kids.
My brother's friend, JP Rosenbaum, was on The Bachelorette. He was one of the men who was vying for The Bachelorette, and he eventually married Ashley. They got married, they had kids. They're since divorced, but it was real. Like, they were fully in love.
And they're still going after all these years. What do they have? They had the Golden Bachelor recently, which was somewhat controversial. So still trying to keep it going. Bachelor in Paradise. That was a little risque from the ones that I saw. But now you have, what's the show on Netflix that everyone watches all the time? Love is Blind.
Look, people are always looking for love, looking for matches. So these types of shows, I think, will be around in some iteration for a while. As long as there are singles.
As long as there's TV, there's going to be a dating reality show. It's the last thing it'll go. It's very cheap to make and high interest.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Review us in the App Store. And any government officials listening, throw Mosh into your group chat. He won't say anything. He'll just watch.
Mo, which Mo is this? He's silent. This Mo is not commenting, but he appears to be taking screenshots of the conversation. See you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.